Welcome, everybody. Sorry to hear when a sunny day out there is behind you, in the outside. Nevertheless, what I'm going to be talking about for the next few talks is going to be on this Islam's forgotten contributions. Now, you know, the reason why I do my talks anyways for the past few years, in fact, it is because of covering the stories that are underreported. And we've talked about, you know, in the past, technology, and then we talked about China, we talked about some of the great leaders and so on. But one subject which I had been talking about many years ago was on religion, Islam. And now I'm coming back to it from the point of view of seeing what it is that we are missing out in terms of giving the actual credit to those people who did the great works in the past for our benefit. And that is also underreported. And there is a lot of material on the internet, but it's not really of common knowledge as to where things need to be given credit to. And in the case of Islam particularly, I think there is not the best of images in the West. And it has been not recently, it has been for decades, not decades, millennia. And we'll see some of the sort of things that have been missed out because of that, if you like, amnesia. A lot of historians of today as well, modern historians, they don't have much material to fall back on because a lot of things is still very much in Arabic and in the old sort of language, which needs to be translated. And what the Arabs did many, many years ago, when Muslims' era was at its height, was they translated a lot of the Greek and Latin sort of, Greek sort of manuscripts into Arabic. And then thereafter, when the Arabic sort of manuals and books were there, they were then translated into Latin and they came into Europe. And we'll see how it is as we progress. But for our sort of new series, as it were, that I'm starting, it's going to be under this Subarik Islam's Forgotten Contributions. And we will see which is that period that is really forgotten. And we'll cover it in this agenda today that I have. And it's going to be looking at the general introduction, which I want to give, as to where it is all starting from and how it came about. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what are the Dark Ages and the golden period of Islam, the House of Wisdom, and the big thinkers of the Muslim era, and the reason for the decline of the Muslim, if you like, golden age. So we'll see some of those things that have come about. But the focus today's talk will be the contributions that have come from the Muslim world to us today. And these are the topics that I'll be sort of very quickly mentioning as well. Coffee, clocks, and chess, the trig devices, vision, camera, and all these things that are there before you. So I'll treat them very quickly as we go along. So what I'm going to be talking about is these missing centuries. That's a whole 1,000 years that are missed out in history. Because what we do is in Europe, we go from the Greeks and the Romans straight to Renaissance. And then in between, we have something called the Dark Ages. Now that's when all the sort of, you know, if you like, religious dogma was very much in vogue, and the feudal system, and of course, monarchs. So a period of really not enlightenment. It was really the Dark Age. And that Dark Age actually coincides with the age when the Muslim era was there. So you can see there has been a concerted effort by, I think, the church or whoever, to keep that sort of aspect of religious empires out of the purview of Europe. And of course, since religion was so sort of much a power in those days, even the monarchs had to be able to try and concede to their supremacy in many ways. And therefore, the religion had a very big hold on the society of that day during the Dark Ages. So we'll see now what it is that was what in Europe meant by a Dark Age. So it lasted 1,000 years, from about 400 to 1400, CE, which is our common era. And the timeline of the European history shows no major advances in the science between the ancient Greeks and the European Renaissance. So, it's rather odd that you had a Renaissance out of nothing. It's a bit like the physicists saying that we all came out of nothing. We're still trying to work out how that works. But in the case of history, we can say, at least in the case of Renaissance, there was a lot of stuff and learning that came from the Muslim era. And of course, during the Dark Ages, what we have is the agrarian sort of economy, and the church was very powerful. And of course, the class structure, which is the upper class and the lower class, which essentially was, the feudal system. So there was very little by way of enlightened views happening in that time, except for what was happening there in the nearby. So what has happened is that for centuries following the fall of Rome, Western Europe was backward and benighted, locked into the Dark Ages. Augustine, you remember, a very renowned sort of scholar of the day, had decreed that belief, not reason, should be the guiding light of the Christian thinking. Now, a lot of religions sort of espouse that, but in the case of Augustine, I think he had a big sway of that period onto the society of that time. As a result, Europeans lived in a world of nominal literacy, not much literacy, and subsistence farming, where blind faith, superstition, and sorcery took the place of medicine or learning. So that's sort of, again, repeating what we said earlier on. Now, what also the church did at that time was it harnessed the nascent aggression among the kingdoms to its own ends and started these holy wars. And the holy wars have also permeated Europe in many ways, but it also extended to the Crusaders when they went to take Jerusalem back and so on. We'll cover all this later sort of period eventually as we come more into our series, more into our series. Now, it's not to say that the Dark Ages were completely dark in terms of no knowledge whatsoever, because there was knowledge, and that knowledge was there in, if you like, in the East, Palestine and all that are currently today. So there was, of course, here the Library of Alexandria, and then Constantinople. All these Byzantine area was quite literate and advanced. And then, of course, we had the Zoroastrians, which were in Persia. They were also sort of knowledgeable on many things. So that was the background on which essentially the Muslim era started to build on. So it started off with a lot of knowledge already coming from the Greeks. And they were wise enough to be able to sort of translate these big works into languages that could be understood by a lot of people at that time in Arabic. And a lot of people of learning and scholarship, they were attracted towards these centers of learning at that time that started to grow in Baghdad. Now, very quickly, we'll have these just little pictures showing you some of the great minds of the Muslim era. These are the people who made immense contributions to civilization, not only in trying to sort of develop the already, if you like, the old ideas and giving them a new sort of relevance, but also did original work in many ways. And these people are the people that we'll be talking about in our subsequent lectures when we go deeply a bit more into what their individual contributions has been. And if it's not just men over here, women over here, you can see extraordinary women from the golden age of Muslim civilization. So we'll be talking about them as well as we progress. So what we will be talking about is the whole of society and its various sort of disciplines that are there. So we have, so what these Muslims did was they developed the ideas that were already prevalent to something which made it much more, if you like, adaptable and usable. And they also transmitted this knowledge as widely as possible. So in a sense, they were great explorers as well, travelers and merchants. And as of course, we've talked about this old Silk Road coming from China into the eastern sort of lands there. So that sort of interchange of ideas was also taking place. So it's not to say it's just that everything emanated from the Muslim era. No, what the Muslims did was to sort of try and bring about the various sort of strands of information, knowledge that was there to put it together and make something very, very sort of useful. So they did the trade as well in silks and spices and goods and acquired scientific knowledge and technical knowledge, which they later made accessible to Europe. So you can see they are like bringing in the civilization, you could call it, from various quarters to their own lands and then extending it beyond to Europe. Then, of course, we hear about these subjects called algebra, alchemy, attitude, all these things. They have the sort of Arabic derived words, and we'll see later on some of the contributions that those thinkers have done towards these types of areas. And even with the Indo-Arabic numerals 0 to 9, 0, of course, came from India. But what gave it the prominence and value to the 0 was the position of 0. Like, for instance, you know, a 10 or 100 or a 1,000 is what the Arabs made that contribution in, which, you know, it really sort of changed the whole game. And that sort of brought about a big surge in advance in mathematics and in scientific sort of thinking. Call it revolutionized the capacity to engage in science and trade. So a humongous jump there that took place. Now, which is a center that has been very instrumental during the Dark Ages? It's this Baghdad timeline here. We can see in the 1637, Islam spreads to Persia and Palestine, Syria, Libya, and so on. And then just a very, you know, I'm trying to give you a broad sort of feeling about the age, as it were, and some of the areas that we need to keep in mind, because we'll get into a bit more detail about the subject matter, be it of whatever the discovery or invention is, or the philosophical ideas are, or religious ideas are. We'll do that in our subsequent sort of lectures. But this is the broad sort of outline you can keep in mind. So Baghdad city was built here in 752 to be the capital of the Islamic Empire under the ruler of Khalif al-Mansur. Now, there are lots of these caliphs whose mention comes up because some of them were very sort of open-minded. They advanced the cause of civilization enormously and scientific thinking. But then there were others who weren't. But that era of the golden sort of period of Islam is to a large extent also because the environment that these caliphs brought about to their societies. Now in 1766, you've got the Mansur Mosque built, okay, that's a mosque. 1786, you've got the House of Wisdom. That's where, in fact, that the fulcrum of the whole learning started to happen. scholars from all over the Muslim world and other worlds around came over to sort of make contributions. Now, the person, Khalif, who was at that time who also built that is Harun al-Rashid. You know, you've heard of this Harun al-Rashid, a very, very enlightened person. He was the Khalif who used to put on ordinary clothes and go around and into the public without incognito, as it were, to find out what was going on in the city. So very, very enlightened man, and there are lots and lots of stories. We'll come to him in due course as in subsequent talks that we do. And then here you got another Khalif, is Mamun, spreads the house. Now he extends the house of wisdom. So you go from 786 to 1813. The Khalif at that time, he also sort of is a big supporter of knowledge and development. And here is the House of Wisdom, goes beyond to 860. And what they have is they hold this House of Wisdom starts to become important because they have a collection of books, the largest collection of books. In fact, they started to compile, not only collect, but also translate into. One must remember that, it was, all written in hand at that time. So books were not sort of plentiful. So to be able to try and find the books and bring them together, it was a big job, and these Khalifs provided the environment for that. Then, of course, in 1258, that's a good 400-500 years later, the Mongols came in. And one of the first things they did with an army of 150,000 is they sort of burned the House of Wisdom down, which is a shame. But then, of course, a few decades later, nobody has heard about the Mongol contribution to that period except for the destruction they left. But the ideas of that time from the House of Wisdom persist even today. So you can see the good idea will persist, and of course, any aggression and killing and destruction doesn't. And of course, the story, 1325, you have Batuta. He's the traveler who went around the Muslim world, collecting ideas and making commentaries of one sort or another. So just a broad sort of perspective of that dark age, if you like, that we talked about earlier on in Europe. This was what was happening in the Muslim world. So Islamic culture became a powerhouse of intellectual exploration and scientific riches over the European Dark Ages. So you can see it coincides with that. Now, these are the big cities of the day. Antioch, Baghdad, and Cairo had libraries with 100,000 books, while the best European library housed at most several dozen. Excuse me. So you can see, just the library in itself gives you the extent of importance that has been given to learning of that period. Excuse me. Yeah, at that time, even the scholars, just for example, scholars of Islam could measure the Earth's circumference, a feat not matched in the West for 800 years. So you can see how advanced they were already to be able to sort of understand it was a global type of setup. It's a sphere that we have, that is Earth, and therefore some smart, I think it was one of those people that we will talk about later, not in this lecture, but in subsequent, who did the calculation. They also introduced a new sort of topic, algebra. Algebra, as you know, is not just dealing with numbers, but it has these variables which are, can be assigned any number. So the value of that variable gives algebra a completely new sort of dimension. Mathematics is a branch of mathematics. They were also adept at astronomy, navigation, developed an astrolabe. Astrolabe is one of those, I've got one of those, in fact, that I brought back from Poland when I've gone there, because it also started somewhere there in the early days, and then, of course, it was enhanced considerably. It's like a slide ruler. It's a sort of mechanical device that tells you the time and direction. Now, one of the things that, of course, they did as well is, of course, translate all the Greek scientific and philosophical texts, include the whole corpus of Aristotle, Galen, Ptolemy, and Plato, everybody. So they were hungry for knowledge. Now, this is where it was happening. The House of Wisdom is the translation. It was an institute and a research center established during the Abbasid time. Now, I'll show you later on the sort of dynasties that were there and how each one of these dynasties impacted the knowledge of that period. So again, Harun Rashid in that period. And of course, is the Bayat al-Hikmah, means House of Wisdom. Okay, again, repeating the same thing, but what a little bit more detail is that they had libraries contain the works of Pythagoras, and Plato, Aristotle, Hippocrates, Euclid, Plotinus, Galen, and all these people here, and also some of the Indian scholars here, Chakra, and then Aryabhata, and Socrates there, Brahmagupta. So there were, collecting books from everywhere. And because they had a spice trade, they had access to all these lands, and the Silk Route, of course, also made it possible. So they had these, highly prized scientists and academics, and they translated, these books in various languages of that day into Arabic, and that sort of gave, of course, that Muslim era the impetus to sort of move forward. That's the building here. There's a House of Wisdom, built in 1830 AD in Baghdad. So it's helped to preserve the knowledge acquired by the Abbasids over the centuries. And it had these during the age of Europe, the library books played a great role. Now, one of the things that we can say is that, it was in those days, there was no other medium as it were to convey knowledge. You either spoke and trained your disciples or taught them. And the other way was, of course, to write it by hand. And one of the things, of course, that Europe made a big advance in was when it introduced the print, the Gutenberg sort of times. And that sort of really made a big difference to Europe because that enabled the dissemination of knowledge much more widely. And that helped quite a bit. Whereas in these Muslim sort of eras, they didn't have that press system and they had to do everything by hand. But nevertheless, they did accumulate a lot of books and create a lot of them. So again, this House of Wisdom, repeating the same thing here. Now, Baghdad was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world, home to Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans from across the Middle East and Central Asia. By the 800s, Baghdad probably had nearly 500,000 people, that is half as big as Rome during the Roman Empire, and was the largest city in the world outside of China. So Baghdad has a unique place, and it sort of made a big difference to controlling that empire and advancing the aims of the empire of that day. Again, the similar picture. You can say it was like a research facility. And of course, all these texts were sort of consolidated there. This is an example of just saying a few things, medical books here and something to do with the, the Kharzmi. This is mathematical and this is just an example I'm showing you, but we'll talk about the more advances later. That's the same thing again. I just thought I'll keep that for record so you can look at yourself if you feel like referencing that. Now, one of the things that was also interested was that at that time, in 1154, one of the caliphs had ordered a world map to be drawn. It was actually, it was not the Caliph, it was Roger II of Sicily. He wanted a world map, and there was this Arab scholar and cartographer who did this. And it's quite astonishing that you had this vision. It was not in the days of satellite and all that type of thing, but you can see there's the Caspian Sea, there's Arabia, the Mediterranean here, the Italy as well. And of course, all these, I think UK is probably down there, Spain, North Africa down here. So quite, and then India down there. So quite an amazingly good thing for people who are, the fastest they could go was on a horse. So amazing type of work there. Now, I won't talk about these people right now because these were the great thinkers. I just mentioned it, Al-Khwarizmi. Yeah, that's where the word algorithm comes from. He is the Abbasid Khalil who enabled the House of Wisdom to grow quite well. And that Ibn Sina, again, a great thinker. We'll talk about him in subsequent lectures. They're great thinkers of the day. Also him made a big contribution to philosophy. And on those days, these scholars were polymath type of people. They just didn't restrict themselves to one's field. They were sort of masters of most of the fields available at that time. So immense sort of holistic approach that they applied to their contributions. Now, from the knowledge came into Europe. You can see in the 12th century here, this person called Adelard of Bath. He is known both for his original works and for translating many important Arabic and Greek scientific works on astrology, astronomy, philosophy, alchemy, and mathematics into Latin. So he did that in order to be able to make it more understandable for Europe of that day. And he did that from Arabic, which were then introduced to Western Europe. So that learning, he's one of those people who sort of was very instrumental in transferring knowledge from the Muslim lands to Europe. There's another person called Frederick II, Holy Roman Empire and enthusiastic proponent of Arabic culture. He was a patron and underwrote translations of Ibn Rushd. Rushd is a big philosopher from Andalusia. We'll talk about him in subsequent lectures. Commentaries on Aristotelian corpus. That's all the works of logic, on philosophy. Now, this is to give you just an idea about the Muslim era. You can see these are all the lands that there. The yellow is the Umayyads, the green is the Rashidun. The Rashidun Caliphs in green here, over these territories, these are regarded as the first four real caliphs of, or regarded by everybody. Subsequent caliphs had, the Shia and the Sunni type of element getting into them. So there's the Umayyads over here. And then you've got the Abbasids in black there. They covered all these regions there. Umayyad, you can see, was in Andalusia. You can see extending and up to the year 1000 there. And the green are the Fatimids. These names are probably very new to you, but subsequently we will cover some of them as to where they were and what it is that they control. But this is just a bird's eye view of that whole region over a period of time there until even the 1900s here. So just going from there, then you've got the Ayyubids. This is the time when Saladin and so on that we hear about, where these are the slave Mamluks. And of course, the Mongols here in India. These are the Ottomans. The Ottomans had a pretty long stretch, and you can see the large area over a big area of time. And so that's just, again, a broad bird's eye view of where the Muslim sort of lands and the era was. This is too detailed. I won't look at that. Now, what is it that happened to that big sort of empire? How did the decline come about, and why did it decline? That's a question that still gets asked a lot. So one of the things we can say, why the Muslim fell behind at the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Professor Azim says there are three factors that should be considered. And he describes them as the rulers being one part of it, the religious leaders the other, and the rationalists the third. So which equates to the religion, politics, and science being, in fact, contributing to the decline. Now, why would science manage to decline? But then the interaction between all these causes, if you like, society to, if you like, move slowly or move fast. And we see that even today. If you get a bad political leader, like say Trump, or even some sort of, or even in our country, in UK, the Brexit thing, politics comes in, affects the whole, scientific progress that could have been had. So all these things get affected. Let's just give you an example that even in those days, the leadership impacted, the decline or the rise. And in the case of Muslim era, the declining factors were, of course, embedded in these areas. So along with other libraries, the House of Wisdom was destroyed during the Mongol invasion. So another thing that happened that really sort of set the Muslim era down is that in the 13th century, the Mongol invasion started, and they burned the House of Wisdom down, burned 100,000 or even more books, killed off a lot of scholars, and that was a great shame. And of course, when that happened, what the religious leaders said of the day was they said, oh, God has punished us. Therefore, we should not have these places like the House of Worship, sort of House of Wisdom and so on. It was their type of way of trying to get back control. We have such people. It's like the of today, the people who pursue this identity politics or the fear-mongering, they try and sort of come into control by selling, like snake oil of the day. So they did that, and of course, they held the society back for a long period after that. There's a siege of Baghdad, these Mongols. Now, one of the things that is interesting that I've been following is this drama series from Turkey called Ertuğrul, The Resurrection. It is based on the story of the first Ottoman ruler. And the Ottomans were there for about 600 years, had their own empire. Anyway, this is a story or drama of the father of the first emperor. And it's dramatized, and it's very interesting, and hundreds of episodes. So once you get into it, you may like it. I've gone through all of them, so I enjoyed that. Here it says destruction by Mongols. So that's the decline that started. A bit more detail saying it's Genghis Khan's son, Hulagu. He sort of had this directive given to him to conquer Persia, Syria, and Egypt. So he went on a rampage and killed and took over the territory, quite dramatically. One other thing that impacted the if you like, the decline was religious thinkers, right? We said one of the three was also the religious thinkers. And one of the religious, very, very prominent religious leader of the day was Al-Ghazali. Now, he was a philosopher, and he diffused the existence of cause and effect. So he said everything is divine that brings it about. So this is where the scientific rationalists started to sort of diverge from him. They said, no, there is a cause and effect. There is, that impact that the laws of physics and chemistry have on our existence. And it's not just the sort of faith and the divine edict that control everything. So there was this big conflict at that time. And he was very, very sort of influential, and he managed to, in fact, influence the rulers of the day quite a bit, with the result that the scientific knowledge and the investigations and if you like, experimentation slowed down quite a bit. It was, he says, the interaction between the church and the scientists. Of course, this is what we said. So what enabled the West to pull ahead was then again in Europe, there was a bit of an enlightened thinking starting to take place, what we call the scientific age, where people started to look at the principles of science and explaining, the science in terms of logical theories, which doesn't introduce the element of God into it. And Europe starts to pull ahead because of that. So it was the scientists of those days in Europe, the few that were there, that enabled the Enlightenment to come about. And while the Arab empire at that time, they were reverting back to very religious thinking, and Al-Ghazali is one of them who contributed a lot towards that. This is just to show you the travels. We'll talk about his travels again in subsequent lectures. What we have here is, his route here. He's traveled quite a bit, and the empire was quite big at that time, and the Muslim countries. So just to give you an idea, it was quite an extensive type of, again, contribution by this traveler. Okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, I think we've done quite a bit. So I won't go into the details of what contributions have come into our homes from that period. I'll do that in the next lecture. And we'll cover, as I said, all these things that I thought I might be able to do, which is to talk about all these contributions that you can see in front of you. We'll go into a bit more detail in the next lecture on that. So with that, I'll stop for the moment and give a chance for a bit of Q&A. Okay, here we go. I'll stop the share. And make it bigger here. Okay, so I'll unmute all of you at the moment, if I can. No, you'll have to unmute yourself. Okay, if anybody has a question, we could sort of take that up.
Yeah.
Who's that? Sorry?
Ansuya.
Ansuya, okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
Ansuya.
You know, what I'm saying is that there's a movement at the moment to teach children in the school all the real story of like slavery and everything else, because what they're not taught is that these countries were given independence, but actually people had to fight for it. But I think, do you think there is a reason to teach children some of these things that have come from other countries to Britain, that it's not all made here, you know what I mean? It'd be nice for children in school to know, and then they would appreciate people more, I think. What do you think? What is everybody else thinking, I don't know, but it would be hard to introduce in the syllabus and all that,
Well, I think because I have an engineering background, my sort of view is that unless you look at a problem and try and analyze it, uh, and you can't find a good solution. If your analysis is not complete, and then what you're trying to attain may not come about. So if one wants to push the agenda of a very nationalistic agenda, then of course it's going to be a very limited view, but it seems to sort of appeal to some people and they feel that is the way to go, and that's why they tailor the history that is taught at schools in such a manner that promotes that idea. Of course, that doesn't contribute much to knowledge. And that's why it's very important to be able to arrive at a good analysis of where we are and why are we at where we are, and be able to then devise solutions which are intelligent. So that is the way that I think. And I would say that the more they teach at school as to what the real history of the world is,
Yeah,
it is going to be, if you like,
not
doing a
easy.
disservice to the population.
Mm.
Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. That's it. Okay, Pamela, they can see you now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my broadband's not very good, so I'll keep it quick. Medievalists are well aware of the role that Islam played in history. When you study medieval manuscripts, medieval history, they are aware of it. It's just not common knowledge in our general education, sadly.
Well, that, and also if you look at the knowledge that is available, it's still very limited, because a lot of books are still not translated, and those books are still around there in libraries or in places wherever they are found. In fact, when I attended the exhibition at the Science Museum, there was an exhibition put together by the Islamic professors group, who then said, look, there are 1,001 inventions we would like to sort of catalog and bring it to more visible sort of, give it more visibility. And I've got a catalog on that, on which I'm pulling out a lot of information from. And he was saying that the professor, that colleague of his, he told him, said, look, there is a complete, there's a big deficient in knowledge regarding, the works that have been produced of that period. And we've got some of those in our own library. So he said, oh, fine, I'm going to start looking at that. And he started to pull out that information. So it is available in some various forms. It needs to be brought together. And one thing that Imran Khan is bent upon doing is also he's setting up a new university to be able to undertake, a fair amount of research into the past, because that has not surfaced much, because the Arab world has been in a real sort of decline for hundreds of years, and they have not been able to sort of make much headway there. So he's going to be making a lot of headway, he says, by introducing these as at all levels of the education curriculum, and also do research. Yeah, Balila.
Just to say, yes, the teaching of history in schools has been sort of stuck in a groove for some reason. So they start with Egypt and you think, oh, that's great. But actually then it jumps to Greece and Rome. Whereas, they don't bring in, there's China, there's kingdoms in Africa, and of course the Arab world. And none of that is touched on. And they're stuck in this groove of they start with Egypt and they go on to Greece and Rome. I don't know why that is. It's most peculiar. It just needs to be redone.
Yeah, well, you see, first of all, the people who write history are the victorious powers of the day. They write the history, and that history is very slanted in their favor. So now you've got all these other countries who are asserting themselves a bit more culturally and becoming more visible, and the people from those lands are writing books on their own histories. Now we're getting to know a lot more.
Yeah.
And I see that, these people who are writing in English, especially from India, they have quite a different take as well. They look at it as to what was happening of that period. So they're adding to the knowledge in a much more significant way. Sooner or later, I think we will have some enlightened sort of educational sort of curricula. Yeah, Jim.
We just talked about schools teaching history of different places. What about around the world, all different religions teaching about other religions?
I agree with you.
That would be very interesting if that could be the role of whatever religion X, Y, and Z to teach about all the other ones, because to some extent, then that may diffuse some of the conflict and also death. Death because of misunderstandings.
Absolutely right. I think the powers that be are the big problems because they apply their own agenda. If you bring in that type of leadership, and that type of leadership is not really brought in by the people, they're put in there. Either they usurp power and take that control, like all the despots that we've had, the Gaddafis and the Salehs and the Saddam and the whole, Sisi and so I mean the endless number of despots who have not done much to their countries, and they argue the case for being there with the West, saying that if we are not here, you're going to have radical people coming in and it'll be like a thorn in your side. False argument, of course, but it's a lazy way of saying, okay, you carry on, we'll turn a blind eye and you do what it is that you do want to do in the country. And as a result of that, you have these leaders who are neither in the progressive camp or even the very conservative side of things. I think these are the people who are there simply for the sake of power, and they don't do much good. And their main aim is to stash money into foreign banks and make a living. I gave you examples of Pakistan as well, of how these two powers, the most recent ones, Zardari and Nawaz Sharif, in the name of democracy, they came to power, looted the country, and hardly spent any on education. And if they did support anybody, it was the more conservative sort of element schools, the madrasas, that they acceded to getting money from Saudi Arabia and what have you. So real quite big mismanagement taking place. So sooner or later, we're going to have some enlightened people who will come and get the schools to teach comparative religion so that people have a better knowledge about all the societies of the world and their beliefs. This is a power game that gets played. That's why we don't have intelligent policies in any country.
Thank you. I was Just one extra thing. I was thinking, particularly, well, the reason why I mentioned religious leaders teaching about other religions is because of the permanency. Because if you think about different countries, they all have different leaders, different philosophy, but religion is more of a constant. And so if the religious leaders could make it their role to teach about other religions and say they're people, but they just follow different religions, I think that would be good because of the permanency. It could be their role to take that on.
Yeah, you see, I myself in India, I went to a missionary school. I mean, it was a it's the best school in the region because all the schools of the day, they were of two types, one which were English medium and the other one was the local language medium. And the local language medium schools were very sort of poorly funded and they didn't have much facilities. And of course, the ones that charged a fee, they were better schools. And one of them, of course, that I went to was a missionary school in Bangalore in India. And then later on in Hyderabad as well, another sort of missionary school from Australia. And of course, I learned Christianity there. And I have high regard for the teachers who taught. They were all Christians. And I studied the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, not John, all the others. So in a way, but I still remain a Muslim because I understood what Christianity was about and also what Islam was about. And I don't think there's much conflict except in the Trinity, if you like. That is where I think the Muslims sort of don't agree. They said God is one, and in Christianity we have the divinity of Jesus Christ. So that's where the falling out comes from. But otherwise, even in the Quran, it mentions that Christians, they're a kind people. The early people who were prosecuted, the Muslims that were prosecuted in Mecca, the Prophet told them to go to Ethiopia, where he says the Ethiopians who had a Christian ruler, they're kind people. So there was high regard for Christianity, except for the philosophy of Trinity. So Trinity is where Islam says is not correct. Mm-hmm. So it's helpful to learn about other religions. I mean, the more you learn about the other religions, the more you see it's so much similar to yours, except the ritual might be a little bit different.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if the religious leaders around the world could teach about other religions, I think that would ease a lot of the issues, rather than the public, the schools. That's
Yeah. Well, you know how it is that here I see that every big cathedral or a church has their own school. Right from me, about 100 yards away, is a huge priory, Catholic sort of thing. And right next to it is a huge school. Now, of course, they start early in terms of teaching the Catholic sort of religion to the students. I don't know how it is done right now, but I can imagine because it is controlled by the church, they would have an influence on the curricula there. That's one thing that the British Empire did quite well, which is they sort of brought in a lot of missionary schools to the country. And that sort of helped quite a bit in terms of bringing in the scientific sort of knowledge as well, which a lot of religious sects in the country started to sort of rail against, because they said, oh, this is bringing in Western sort of, scientific, they did say knowledge, but practices which we don't agree with. But the schools that I went to, they were lovely schools. There was not just one school. There was 3 schools all in a line. One was the St. John's, which was my school, which was Anglican. Next to us was the St. Aloysius, which was a Catholic. and the next to that was St. Germain. These are huge schools, each having about hundreds of students. They did a good job of building schools, is one thing that I immediately would give acknowledgement to for the British Empire in India. Well, George, what happened to you?
I'm here. Listen, I'm concentrating.
You're still with us.
I have to concentrate.
No what?
I have to concentrate on what you were saying.
Oh, all right. Okay, fine. Good.
That's very good. That was a very good presentation. Well done.
Okay, very good. I've got lots more for the next few talks that we're going to have. I'll be covering, both the technological advances, the philosophical ideas, even the religious ideas. So there's plenty there. For me, it's a little bit of a relief, because otherwise each week I had to sort of think and say, what am I going to talk about? Now I know a whole slew of things that I'm going to be talking about. Yes, Giselle.
The only thing I would really say in answer to what Jim was saying is about maybe religion should be taught more in schools, is that from what I'm seeing, more and more people are turning away from religion and becoming agnostic or atheist, or religion doesn't feature. And the move away from practicing religion seems to be more and more all the time. I've seen actually in my work, where also we look at statistics, and in my work, when we start to work with a family, one of the first things one does is filling out forms: name, address, religion, culture. And it's just more and more when it comes to religion, how very, very many more people I'm seeing from the 1980s put down religion and say, well, my parents were Christian, Jewish, Muslim. I'm nothing. I'm not practicing anything. So I can only think maybe that's one of the reasons why they're not teaching religion more in school. It seems less important to young people as time goes by. I mean, I do admit, I think it's very interesting and wonderful to look at, but to study. But as far as things which are important for teenagers to learn, maybe they consider religion isn't as important as some other things. I don't know what other people think.
It's because it's been taken off the curriculum. You see, like I spent 25 years teaching religion in schools, but then it was a proper subject. It was a proper GCSE subject, and you could do it for ages. You see, but now it's I'm thinking back the last 7 or 8 years, it's on a carousel. It's what they call a carousel. You do 6 weeks of history, 6 weeks of geography, 6 weeks of RE, and then PHSE. Because not only religion is off now, it's history is also off as well. You see, so like it's been downgraded. But
it has, yeah. But also, even where I'm from, I had my education in South Africa, and religion was an optional subject, and it was discontinued after the age of about 13. It wasn't being taught at all. And really, even when I was at school, almost most people I was at school with, whatever religion their parents were getting away from religion, and were not practicing. Maybe the parents were upset about it. It wasn't happening.
Well, a lot of the students used to like it, because it depended on the teacher. I mean, I don't know if you remember, there was in the Labour Party, there's a group called Militant a while ago. You remember Militant in London? No.
Oh yeah.
Some people will remember. Well, I taught the children of 2 of the leaders of Militant, and they withdrew their children from religious education, because it wasn't. They didn't want children to be to learn about religion. And these children, they used to sit at the back of the class and they used to do something else, you know. On the day they left, when they were 16, they came up to me and they asked me for some. They said, "Oh, we've really enjoyed your lessons. I'm sorry we couldn't take part. Have you got some books that we could have?" You know. So I think a lot of this thing is down to parents taking people out of religion.
You see, I talked about the decline taking place, right? And Ghazali was a very important thinker of the day who was quite religious and made lots of contribution. And that sort of impacted the society in some ways that it excluded certain types of thinking. Ibn Rushd later on started to sort of reply even in the sense that rational sort of thinking is important and not just dogma. So to keep an open mind, even if you're, if you're reading religion is important, because I don't think religion says you've got to close your mind.
No. Depends on the teacher.
Yeah, and that's where I think the problem lies, because if you close your mind, then you don't listen anymore, and then you follow the dogma and the ritual.
I mean, in the Catholic schools, you know, we only used to do in the Catholic Church, you know, we didn't do much on well, you did Islam as well, actually, believe it or not. But like I used to do Buddhism for GCSE as well. I would do because you had to do two. You see, you had to do Christianity. Everyone had to do it, and then you could choose another one. So I used to do Buddhism, and I think Stoke Newington School was the only school in London doing Buddhism for GCSE, which is quite extraordinary, you know.
Mm.
But like I did do Islam as well in the other schools, for GCSE. But then you came across all sorts of problems because you know, like I mean, as we've spoken before, you know, like you know, as soon as you start mentioning Sufis and stuff like that, you know, you get some people, you know, not very happy with you, with you know, teaching the kids about Sufism and stuff like that. It depends on the mosque that they were going to, I think. Yeah,
there are so many sects in every religion,
exactly.
And they seem to sort of, you know, clutch the sort of the variance that exists and highlight that to the point of making it a completely different thought and religion altogether. It's a shame because they lose the overall, you know, the sense and wisdom that there is in religion. If one seeks to find wisdom, they can find it. But if they want to sort of find power structures that enable them to sort of keep their positions, then you're going to exploit the verses in the way that you want to.
When I went to primary school, we used to pray that you would be converted to Christianity. You know.
Yeah, Malayla.
The primary school.
Isn't it a pity that some countries have picked a religion as the state religion? That's quite a problem, isn't it? Do you think so?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Go ahead.
There are countries where one particular religion is picked as the state religion. Doesn't that lead to problems?
Not necessarily, but it does lead to some people exploiting it. Because take the case of Pakistan, there are two countries that are based on religion. One is Pakistan, the other one is Israel. In the case of Pakistan, it's quite clear in the constitution that every minority has got to be given the rights. So everybody can vote. But I think in the case of Israel, they twist it around and they say, no, only the Jews can vote and not the Arabs over there. That sort of, you know, thing is not good. But any enlightened constitution should have those elements in it, which will give, you know, equal status to its citizens and freedoms as well. If you look at the Sharia, which is normally sort of quoted in a rather negative fashion most of the time. Most of the principles of Sharia are in the American Constitution. They're built in there. Freedom of life, freedom of education, freedom of the dignity of man, you know, whatever it may be. So that sort of protection to life. So those principles are there. Now, when we talk about Sharia law, it's not really a law. It's the principles that are enunciated. You know, the principles come from the Quran and from some of the practices of the Prophet. And these principles then can be coded into law by different countries when they pass legislation.
Right.
So you need to differentiate between, you know, each. So the different Muslims interpret some of those principles in different ways. Like Saudi Arabia, they're very strict. Their sort of law is, you know, very harsh. And there are liberals, you know, in other countries which have very good laws. So the principles are the ones that are the ones that need to be looked at. But, you know, for various exploitative reasons, the leadership is to be held accountable for that.
Can I just say, Shafiq,
Yeah.
in Israel, Palestinians can vote, and there are Palestinian cabinet ministers as well. These are the Palestinians that have citizenship, and there are very, very many of them, especially a huge proportion live in East Jerusalem. The Palestinians who do not vote in the general elections might be living in Gaza or up north, but they are ruling their own areas, and they have their own leaders, and they can vote for their own leaders. Unfortunately, especially in Gaza, they have voted for leaders in Hamas, and it's Hamas that are ruling them. That's the reason why. But there are lots and lots of, I can't remember the exact, there's 2 million, I think, or 1.5 million Palestinian Israeli living in Israel with full legal citizenship.
And they have all the privileges of Israelis?
Yes.
All the privileges, they vote, and some of them have even become cabinet ministers in parliament. Yes.
They are in the Knesset. They've got votes.
Yes, in the Knesset, that's right.
The what, sorry?
In the Knesset, in the parliament, they've got, they're exactly the same.
Yes.
They've got full,
no difference.
full rights.
No different.
And they, in fact, one of the issues is they're not voting enough. The Arabs are not voting enough.
That's right.
That's one of the big issues. They've got the
Yes.
right, but they don't actually exercise it.
That's right, because they're busy asking, how can we encourage more Palestinians to vote? Why are so many of them not voting?
Yeah.
Yes,
Why don't they
that's right.
vote? Why is it that they don't vote?
I don't know. But
I don't know, apathy. I don't know. Well, what's the reason, Jim? Do you know?
I don't know why, but they've. I know that they're in the Knesset and.
Okay, I'll find out and we'll talk about it next time.
It's a full
I mean, lots of them do, but there's not enough of them. I suppose the same as what we've got here. They're busy saying that more people in the UK should vote. There's too many people who just don't bother. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very close, the voting there between the Likud and the other. Maybe because it's so close, maybe a little bit like here as well.
I don't know enough about that, so let me follow up on that and see what is what.
The country's a tiny country, so it's actually a big proportion. It's only about 8 million people in the whole country.
That's right.
It's a tiny country. There's only, I think, in the whole world, there's only about 12 million Jews. It's a tiny country.
But it's smaller than Wales. It's smaller than the county of Wales.
Yeah.
That's small.
Yeah, George. Yeah, you're waving your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you. You know, you say that because Gaza is part of Israel, I'd imagine. You know, like, I mean, prior to 1948, it was called Palestine, and then all the Palestinians obviously voted for their leaders. So I can't understand how. I mean, forgive my ignorance, but like, what was the situation prior to 1948? All of the Palestinians, they voted for the country, didn't they?
Have you got 2 days to discuss it?
No, but I mean,
Oh God, you opened a massive can of worms. We
I
can't
think we
sit
need,
here for the
I
next
think,
5 hours.
I think we need a separate class for that, George, to be able to go into. We need a separate class for that to go into all that.
More than one class. They're giving whole courses for this.
I mean, actually, in the whole world, the actual it's in the news a lot, so it looks bigger than it is. But the whole place is the size of Wales.
Yeah.
A whole area. It's just actually tiny, but it's just people make a big. It's so frequent. It looks huge, but it's actually only a tiny amount of people actually.
When you're there, you realize how incredibly small it is. I was so shocked the first time I went. You get in the car and you drive from one end to the other in a matter of a few hours, and you say, "What? One border to the other?" You just can't believe it. It's incredible.
Yeah, it looks very, very small anyway on the map.
Yeah, I mean, there's
It's
so many.
tiny.
It's very important to discuss that issue, but there's so many other countries with enormous people, you know, being killed, you know, millions of people being killed, which are huge, you know what I mean? But people tend to focus on that for some reason or other. It just happens to be in the news. It's completely irrational.
Yeah, quite.
There's so much suffering in Yemen. I saw it's so sad.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, it is
And,
terrible.
Oh, Myling, welcome.
There's a big thing.
Welcome.
Hi, isn't that because they are a lot of Jewish supporter in the United States, and they influence a lot in United States policy in favor of Israel and Jewish people, and that's why it's on the news a lot. Without American support, I think it would be a very different story.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is the Jewish people the world over, they have gone for education in a big way. And whether they are in, you know, in UK or Europe or USA, wherever they are, they have enormous capability, which makes them sort of attain to good positions. And then they are able to influence a lot from the point of view of what their own particular sort of beliefs are and what their interests are as well. That's not to say everything is negative, but I think it is going to be in favor of some of the that belongs to their group of people.
Well, in the United States, a lot of Jewish people immigrated to the States. And when I was in New York, I do understand over 30% of population in New York alone are Jewish descent. And so whether you look at the Senate, whether you look at the Capitol Hill, or the lots of professions are dominated by this descendant of Jewish people, and they're very much in favor of supporting Jewish policy, and therefore it makes
there's a very good reason for it, because it was especially felt, I might be telling you what you probably know, that after the Second World War, when over 6 million Jews were murdered, because they didn't have anywhere to go, and it was so strongly felt after that the Jewish people must have a country, somewhere to go.
Deal. But if America wasn't supporting the Jewish population and Israeli policy, it would not make such a big news. I mean, I know a lot of Jewish people, including my own daughter-in-law, that identify themselves as a Jewish, although she's third generation. Her mother is a second generation, but they identify themselves as a Jewish. And so there's an awful lot of that. I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is that's why they're on the news a great deal.
Well, it's so heartbreaking for so many Jewish people to find that their grandparents, great-grandparents, and their family were murdered because they didn't have anywhere to go. They were arriving in ships, and every country they went to, they were turned away. They didn't have anywhere to go. That's why Israel is so important to them. It's the tiniest country.
I do understand.
In times when they are discriminated against, they must have a homeland.
Yeah,
I think
also a lot of them are very poor.
Equally, people like my daughter-in-law and her family cannot understand how could a group of people like the Jewish people who were so discriminated and badly treated could now be treating Palestinians in the same way they were treated. I mean, it's a very much more complex, but I'm just answering the problem of why it goes.
Can I just say that there is a perception that
it produces a lot of news.
Yeah, Malila.
That with most countries, that if there is no outside interference, in the end, most countries sort their problems out. I think there is that perception that without interference, there is a greater chance of countries resolving their problems. I think that is what a lot of people think.
I think most of the society,
American or anything, I support what the Jewish people feel, but there is this perception that the interference doesn't help.
see, we've got to keep in mind that, you know, we've got things like religion, and then we've got ethnicity, and, you know, whatever it may be, you know, the color of skin, racism, that these factors, they get exploited by the leaders.
That's a fact.
And the leaders are the ones that I think need to be held responsible, because they frighten the public into coming into power. But how do we overcome this is an interesting question. And the only way we can overcome this is to be able to look at you know, education in a manner which is, you know, open and objective, and be able to see whether one can deliver justice on that basis. That's one of the things that, going back to my talk that I did today, the element of justice was crucial to the caliphs of the day. And that is a theme that has been put into this drama of Turkish drama that I mentioned, the Ethereal. It's on Netflix, by the way, if anybody wants to look at it. The pursuit of justice for those nomadic Arabs of Central Asia is what this drama is about, which ends up or culminates in the first Ottoman emperor. And then we have a 600-year period of Ottoman rule in that region, which is quite astonishing. But that is because they have given the notion of justice very, very great importance. And when I talk about, let's say, that one of the big elements of Christianity and of Islam, it is said that, you know, Christianity talks about love, which everybody accepts, you know, in all its scripture. And in the case of Islam and Quran, it's justice, which is the one that's very crucial. Because if you look at the two things, justice can be delivered up to a point, because you can legislate and do what sort of, you know, this type of things that you can. Whereas love, you can't. You can't legislate anybody to go and love somebody else, see? So it becomes rather difficult to deliver. So this series highlights that quite well. And because it is drama, it's very enjoyable. For the first time, the Muslims are portrayed as being the good guys, you know, not the ferocious ones with beards and toting, you know, swords or umbrellas or machine guns or what have you.
Yeah, I think that the whole thing is, you know, the whole thing about religion, you know, like is yeah, that's why I now take a Gnostic perspective about it, because you see these religions that we're talking about, yeah, the three religions, I call them New Age religions, because they're so new, you know, like you know, the Jewish religion, the Hebrew religion is really only 3,500 years ago. And there were people living in that country who were living very peacefully. You know, like, I mean, you know, it's when they arrived there, they were instructed by Yahweh to kill everybody, you know, which is quite strange, because you have the 10 Commandments, which are given to Moses, apparently, and the same God, you know, and in the 10 Commandments, it said, thou must not kill, right? Okay, we all agree on that. And then when they get when they get over and they see this land of milk and honey, when the people don't convert to their religion, the same God who tells them do not kill tells them to kill everybody and then take it over. You see, so the whole thing is very peculiar. Even in Islam, it's the same thing with the Prophet Muhammad when he gets to Medina. You know, like you say, you know, is they don't want to convert. They've got their own gods. So they kill 12,000 people. Right? So it's a forced religion and forced. And then you get Christianity, which was all over by 300 probably. And then you get the Roman version of Christianity, which is being one endless slaughter. Right from
George, I'm not so sure about Muhammad. You see, when Muhammad goes to Medina, he goes with 70 people, his disciples, because he's he is forced out of Mecca.
Yeah.
So he goes with 70 people. So I can't imagine him going and killing 12,000 with 70 people.
No, the army went back, didn't it?
Well, no, what happens is that he was invited to come to Medina by the Arabs of that city and of the Christians and the Jews, because they had problems with each other. They said, Muhammad is the right guy, he's just, so let's invite him. And he comes over there and then takes over. And then subsequent to that, you know, they have this continuous battle going on with Meccans. The Meccans are the ones who want to get rid of Muhammad. And that's where all these battles take place. But then what Muhammad brought, I think, which makes a difference to why Islam spread so sort of fast, is because he took the tribal code, which was really abused because the chieftain laid down the law and that was it, or whatever the tradition was. Then he extended the sort of the justice or the rules to the community, which means that anybody who accepts this notion of one God and Prophet being Muhammad being the Prophet of God, they would be as equal to anybody else. So the tribal sort of limiting type of ideology was extended to include everybody who wants justice, and that's why it spread so fast. And of course, while it was spreading, there were these two big empires, the Byzantine and the Sassanids, and they were and they fought against both of them, and they in fact won. They won because their ideology was a bit more powerful because it catered to the requirements of the time.
But then you also had the breakup of Islam very, very quickly. And you got, you know, the followers of Ali and everybody else, you know. So you know, Catholics and the Protestants.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every religion sort of has their own sects, and this is one of those two big sects that emerge. But the basic principles are still there. They believe in the one God, they believe in the Quran, and they believe in the Prophet. Then subsequent to all the other things is what makes the difference. So as a people, they're still the same, Muslims. Okay, shall we sort of call it a day now?
Yeah, yeah, I've got to go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.